So this my this.
Hello, everyone. Off to you, Vinny.
All right. Well, we have two very important people on this call. They are expert software engineers for Code.org. They've helped to design both of the tools we're going to talk about throughout this webinar, the App Lab and Game Lab. And I'm so glad that they can join us. So if you ladies want to introduce yourselves, that would be awesome.
Sure, I'll get started. Hi, my name is Erin Peach, and I am a software engineer here at Code.org. And at the moment, I work on adding new features and upkeeping to Game Lab and App Lab.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Caley. I'm also a software engineer here at Code.org. Worked on a lot of different things here. In particular, things you might have touched, some of our code tutorials. I worked on a lot of tools for the CS Discoveries course last year, and right now I'm focusing on tools for the teacher experience. So all of the stuff that lets you manage your sections on Code.org is work that stuff that I build. Yeah. Also, hi,
cool.
hi, someone from Ontario. I'm also from Ontario, and so I'm really excited that you're here.
So cool. Well, thank you guys, girls, the ladies, both for joining and being willing to do this. We're excited to have you.
We're excited to be here.
Yes, yes. All right, so let's dig in. So what is App Lab and what is Game Lab? And then we're going to look at some of the differences. And like I said, we have our experts here that will help us see the differences more clearly and which tool might be better to use depending on what it is you want to create or what you want your students to create, or the experience that they'll get from using the tools. So the first one, Game Lab, and you can read it there, and I don't like to read slides to people, but I think I might actually read a little bit of this. But it's a programming environment where you can make simple animations. This is really good for games, working with objects or characters, and this, of course, uses blocks that are kind of based on JavaScript. You can hit the text button, and I'll show you that in a minute, where you can see some of the syntax as opposed to just blocks. And then similarly, App Lab is also based on a block program that has JavaScript in it as well, and you can switch between the text and the blocks. And this is more of a programming environment where you make a simple app, not so much a game, even though the students love to try to make games in App Lab. If you've experienced that, you'll know it. You may have experienced that. All right, so let's look at the actual tools, what they look like on the browser. All right, so the first one we're going to look at is Game Lab. If you haven't used OneTab, it's really cool. It's a nice little extension you can get on the Chrome browser. All right, so here's Game Lab. This is kind of like the home page for it. And it's featured in Unit 3 in Unit 3 in CSD, CS Discoveries. And some of the different ones we want to look at today is, let's go back. Yes, the racing game. Now where is the racing game? Let's just click on it. All right, so here's the game. I just wrecked. I'm really good at that.
How fast?
So you can, in this case, we would just refresh the page. There, I'm not terrible after all. Oh, no, I spoke too soon. Okay, so that's what the interface of the game would look like for a user. And then we can click the, show me the code button there, and then we're able to remix this. And if you're not sure how all that works, the remix, now it's yours. It becomes your app or your game in this case. And you can rename it and save it and do whatever you want to it. But so if we run it in here, we get the same interface over here in the preview box that you would see, if you were just in the browser like we were a minute ago. And it looks like this is a safe area over here. Oh, okay. All right, so that's the interface. And if you look over here, here's the toolbox. And you've got all the different tools here, color-coded, because it makes it better for me even. And you can see here's the program where all the code is. And then we've got these other tabs over here for animation. That's where they can design their own sprite, or in this case, and all of those things. You can add animation to it where things move, and we're going to get a little instruction on that in a couple minutes from our experts. And then you see there I hit that button that said there's the show blocks, and here's the show text. And so in that, you can see the syntax. They can go in there and make any changes they want to the code, or they can do it with the blocks. So let's look at here's a Pong game. Well, let's wait on that. That's in the App Lab. I don't want to confuse anyone. There's another little game that Erin's made called Erin's World.
Can you move you? Yeah, you can. Oh, cute.
Yeah, it's adorable.
Less of a game and more of a interactive movie.
There you go. Yeah, so there's a ton of fun stuff you can do. Do you want to add anything on that, Erin, or you good?
Nope. It's kind of one of those. We look at the My World projects as a really nice introduction to Game Lab, because you get to start to experience moving things around and moving a character and having that character interact with other items. So this is just mine, but we've got there's a lot of My Worlds floating around on our project gallery. You can learn a little bit about a lot of people, and it's a really great place to start exploring Game Lab.
If you go to the VinnyNet homepage for Game Lab, there's actually starter projects for the My World app, code.org/lab, and you can start there and kind of make your own. Tom had a question about getting a link to those projects. We can send you a blog post that has a link to all of those projects, so you can check them out on your own. I think Vinny might have that link.
Yeah, we'll have that. Michelle can probably put that up for us in the chat. And so all those links are there too. Yes, perfect. All right, so there's Game Lab, and as that was Caley, right? That was talking about the starter ones.
Yeah. So on the second one is the My World project. So you can always create your own.
Yeah. So all those are there. These are good too to just tinker with if you're not really sure what to do. Get in there and break the code a little bit.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll look at some App Lab stuff, and then we'll get some more, talk about the differences. I guess we'll talk about the differences. So here's App Lab. You can try it out. There should be some starter projects here as well. I remember doing these a couple of years ago before I even was teaching CSD. I feel like I know so much more about it now after having had taught it and having taught it too. Now I've got tabs everywhere. It's a crazy mess. All right, so the slingshot, that's just still Game Lab, isn't it? That's not what we want.
Vinny, while you're pulling that up, we would love to take a chance to answer Marcia's question in the chat. Marcia asked, how would we see someone using the My World project in a non-CS class? I think it really lends itself to storytelling in a fun way. So in an English class, maybe you're reading, I'm trying to think of a book you'd read in English class. Maybe you're reading Hamlet. And you use this as an opportunity for students to show, the things that they think they would see in Hamlet's world. That's kind of a non-CS class. In a science class?
Yeah, so we've actually seen some really cool ones for science classes. Maybe I can try and pull it up. It's probably buried in our gallery, but we've seen a student make an interactive animation about how cells split up. In Game Lab in particular. I think Vinny's going to talk about App Lab, and he's going to, he has some examples that were made in science class too, so we can touch on that a bit more.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So when I think of the science class, I think of like 6th grade where we did this, or not 6th grade, 7th grade, our teachers this year in science did like an ADI thing, and they had to get evidence and then put that evidence into a database of some sort. So they were using data in not Excel, but the Sheets, Google's product, to organize their data. And I was thinking like this, and I'm going to let these ladies talk about this a little bit more. I don't know if I should, I'll just go with it. About this voting app that's really cool and does use a database. I don't know if you want to go there yet, but do you want to kind of talk about how you could use a database like that on evidence of something in a program?
Yeah, why don't we save this one? I think a good one to talk about, we'll talk about that one in a bit, but a good one to start with might be the periodic table app. That really nicely shows kind of how AppLab can be used.
All right, awesome. Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
All right, so talk me through it.
So this is another app that we found that a student made recently over the past couple of weeks and shared. And I think that they were studying for a test or something is the story that we got. And so they used AppLab to kind of create this like about the periodic table. So you can go into the different groups and they have information on them, and you can go back home or next. And they basically did like kind of a report on the periodic table, but through AppLab, which was really cool to see.
Wow. Yeah, cool. Hope that helps answer your question, Marsha. I can only see my screen, so let's go back. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
That's exactly
right,
like
so
the review game. Sorry, I was just answering Marsha's question.
No, that's great. So yeah, so it is like that would be like a review game. All right.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I probably didn't do a super awesome job at explaining some of the differences. So I'm going to let you two do that. So there's the questions. Were the tools designed with a specific purpose in mind? Like, what is the intended purpose? And if you can maybe speak to some of these questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So in general with our tools on code.org, we're trying to create environments that enable kind of all students to be able to quickly learn and use programming concepts to make something that they think is really cool and that they like. And so what we did with AppLab in particular was AppLab is the one that has on the left, it has like the more phone screen looking interface, the same like ability to type and blocks and all of that, but it's this like app interface, and you can create different screens, you can kind of design those screens interactively, and then you can write code about what happens with that interaction in that app. So it's like a really nice way to quickly prototype an app. It's also used in the third unit of computer science principles, which is the AP course, and it's our tool for introducing basic programming concepts. So things like functions and parameters and events and all of these kind of concepts are introduced through AppLab in a way that kind of is engaging to students. And so that particularly with AppLab. With GameLab, we wanted something that GameLab is more about having this kind of interactive world. So sometimes that's a game. Sometimes that's like Erin's world where, there's this idea of objects or characters that kind of move around in space and interact with each other. And you can create various animations with that or games, whereas AppLab is kind of less, it can do that, but it is harder to do that in AppLab because of the applications that are available. So this one is a GameLab game that is like bouncing up and down that a student made recently. GameLab is the one with the square and with that whole animation tab so that you can kind of draw your own animations and include them in your game, whereas AppLab is the one where you're kind of designing those screens and how do they interact. There's a bunch of questions popping up. So give me just
All right, sure.
Oh, if Marcia, if you're asking about the slingshot game, that was a game in Game Lab. And yeah, there's kind of a lot of physics that's built into Game Lab that helps people you do trajectories and gravity and stuff like that. So there's a nice intermingling of scaffolding that we've built in to enable that, but also giving students the opportunity to think about that and plan that into their games.
And often you can actually do very similar very similar projects in Game Lab and App Lab. I think Vinny has an example of a Mother's Day card in App Lab and one in Game Lab, and you can, which are in those links, which we can pull up. But there are some things that are done much easier in Game Lab and much easier in App Lab, but sometimes they do overlap quite a bit because their base is both JavaScript. Yeah, so this is a Mother's Day card built in App Lab, and then
which one do you want to see?
There was one in Game Lab if you scroll up.
Yeah. All right, so then specifically, what would be, you're saying you can do similar things, but one might be easier in another?
Right, so this is kind of an example of something that if you press spacebar on the spinny, it kind of changes views. Yeah, it's like an interactive kind of animation card. And so this one is cool because I think that the student made some of those animations in Game Lab in that animation space. The App Lab one, they were using the drawing category. If you go to the code blocks, there's a drawing category, or maybe it's called Turtle. Oh boy, I can't remember. It was called Turtle. Yeah. So they were using a bunch of turtle commands to be able to randomly draw these scribbles, which is available in App Lab, whereas Game Lab has more you add objects that have these kind of animations on them. And so they're both making Mother's Day cards, but they have kind of different tools available to them. Yeah.
Very cool. And then one big difference, and you could, I'm sure, explain it better, but is the idea of this, in Game Lab, there's the draw function is always just going, and then in App Lab, it's more event-driven. Is that an accurate statement, or could you clear that up?
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, so App Lab is more event-based, so what that means is an event is, an example of event is like click button, or, I don't know, move mouse over something. And when that happens, then you trigger something else to happen in App Lab. Whereas in Game Lab, you are using this thing called a draw loop and setting up the state of the world to create animations. So they're actually very different programming paradigms. One of the questions was advice on what you use for the projects until we get to know how to differentiate them.
Yeah, I think a great resource for that is the forum on code.org, which I think is forum.code.org. And that's where a lot of teachers can get together and share projects they've done or give advice or ask questions. And I also believe that the facilitators are pretty active on that as well. So I think that's a really powerful resource for asking advice or kind of brainstorming ideas, that sort of stuff.
The other thing I would recommend is going to those kind of home pages for the tools, so code.org/GameLab and code.org/AppLab. AppLab actually has an hour of code that we built, so you can do an hour of code with AppLab and kind of get introduced to the tool. That's a really great way to kind of see what it can do. And then the other page, so code.org/GameLab, has some example projects that you can kind of remix and play around with and kind of see what each of them does. Yeah, so there's some resources on the site to kind of get started with that. And it also depends if you're teaching the course or not. If you're teaching the course, each of these tools is associated with a unit of curriculum that is going to introduce all of these things in depth. step by step.
Mhm.
Awesome. What? Do I need to bring the questions back up, or could you? Or I can ask them from here. Multitasking is impossible, but we all try to do it. Okay, so what are we covered some of that. Are there any tool specific limitations? I mean, you kind of covered a little bit, but anything that may not have been clear?
Yeah, I think the big one that sticks out for me is that in Game Lab you have a lot of control over your art and your animation, and it's really developed to kind of explore these artistic ideas through computer science, as well as learning computer science fundamentals. Whereas in App Lab, the focus is definitely less on the animation and the art. You're able to do some basic drawing in there and import your own images, but it's definitely kind of more focused on the event-based programming, building the structure, building the events and reactions to those events. So I think those are kind of, they strike me as the tool-specific limitations between the two.
Yeah. You can often build one thing and the other, but it might be more challenging.
Yeah.
All right, very cool. So what's your favorite thing, unless there's a question coming in, just jump in, but what's your favorite thing about each tool? Do you have something that you just really like about one tool versus the other?
We will definitely get into that. I wanted to point out Nicole made a really good point. To get to know the tool, going through some of the levels, they have a lot of scaffolding of concepts and are really helpful to kind of not only get to know the tool, but get to know like the content and the curriculum and the kinds of things that these tools can be used to teach. So thanks, Nicole, for pointing that out as well. Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to talk about any favorite things?
Yeah. I guess one thing that we can bring up in App Lab, if Vinny wants to bring up the voting application example, one really, really cool thing about App Lab is that it allows you to incorporate data into your projects, whether that's collecting data, displaying data. We have a data tab that's really designed to empower students to use data and learn how to best use that in their projects. So let's see if we can bring that up. Perfect. All right, sweet. So as you can see in this sophisticated app, we are going to be voting on whether we prefer dogs or cats. And Vinny, if you want to go ahead and click Run, you can place your vote for whether you're a dog person or a cat person. And then if we want to go ahead and remix it, we can take a look at some of the code and what's happening.
You should vote first, though.
Yeah, you should definitely vote.
Good to vote.
Ooh, cats are screaming dogs. Yeah, so let's take a look at the remix and we can kind of do a deeper dive into the data tab. Perfect. And if you want to click on the data tab as well, we can show what's happening there. Great. So now if you want to run it again here and vote, we can start to see this data get populated. So since we just started this app fresh, there's only one vote so far, and that is for dogs. And now we've got one for dogs and one for cats. And Vinny, if you want to click on the vote table in the data tab, perfect. So you can see that this is the data that we've started to collect. And obviously this is a very small scenario here. But if we shared this with our friends and our family and we were able to get a lot of data, this really allows us to experience what it's like to work with a bigger survey and to handle and display all that data. What's also really cool about the data tab is that you can import and export data. So if, for example, something we wanted to learn in class was how to use Google Sheets or Excel, we could export the data that we collected from our survey and import it into Google Sheets or Excel, and then manipulate that data and display it how we want it there. And we could also do the reverse. If we collected a bunch of data from another source or we borrowed data from another source, we could import it into App Lab and use this data tab to display that data. So I think it's really powerful that it allows us to incorporate data, since a lot of what we're seeing in technology is trending towards data and big data. It gives students a taste of that in the classroom.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool.
Select data as a number using the same inputting.
Let me see if we can pull that in. But I don't know
Yeah, we're both reading at the same time.
Someone was mentioning that it can be useful to just kind of look through a bunch of student projects to kind of understand what is made in these. Then if you go to studio.code.org/projects, this is our public gallery. If you go to the public section, public at the top. Cool. So this is our public gallery. So anytime students make a project, and for certain ones are above a certain age, they can publish their projects to this public gallery, and so you can kind of see what students are making. This is super useful because we have a lot of different tools beyond just Game Lab and App Lab. So they each have, some sections, but are really nice to kind of see some examples of what students are making. So Robot Run, what else is in App Lab? There's a calculator someone made in App Lab. Yeah, so these are really fun to kind of look through, yeah, for all the different types of apps.
Absolutely. And Marcia gave a really good example of using that data tab in class to collect responses from, I guess the example used was the melting temperature of ice. Additionally, what's really great about that data tab is that that data persists. So if you have students doing those experiments across different classes throughout the day, or even just within the same class, they can all go ahead and log that data, and you can start to see trends. Maybe if you're collecting, the temperature every day, and see if anything changes with that. So that, yeah, the data tab is really powerful for stuff like that, and it can be a cool way to get everyone's experiences and information that they're gathering.
And Joe made a great suggestion, which is to have a best of section in our public gallery. So the first 10 or so projects in that gallery in each section are ones that we've curated. So those aren't chronological, they're ones that we've pointed out that we really like. And then after that, they come in as chronological. We like the first ones to be really exciting, so yeah. Yes. But we thought about making that more clear and have like a featured kind of section. Yeah, still a work in progress, but it's something we like. Oh, there's a dodgeball.
Yeah, I just wanted to play it.
When you share a project, it is not also published. So you have to give explicit permission for that project to be published to the gallery. Sharing just means you kind of have a link to that project that you can send to anybody. There's a separate publish button, that purple one there. You can also send a link to your phone, which is nice. A lot of students do that for App Lab in particular, since they tend to be kind of similar to phone apps. So they'll send it to their phone and they can play around with it on their phone and share it with their friends or their parents. Which Vinny is doing right now.
86753. Okay. Yeah. And this is a good way too. Just when I have my students, we can always go into their the dashboard and the teacher dashboard to see the students' work. But I have them share that link and paste it into a Google form, so they're all in one place. And then when I go grade them, I can just grade that class and see if their link is there and test their game. So just a little side note that might be useful.
Marcia asked if they can embed their programs within my Canvas LMS. I don't know what that means.
I think Canvas is a content management system for classes.
Yeah, totally. Peer reviewing each other's games is a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, and something we'd love to enable on our platform eventually, but currently do not. Yeah. Let's see. Some other kind of new areas. You get all the student projects in one place. I missed that. Oh, so there's, when you have a teacher account on code.org and you add students to your section as a teacher, there's something called the teacher dashboard, and in that dashboard you have access to all of your student projects and any of the work that they've done in class. So that's all part of that kind of section management on the dashboard of code.org. So that's able to do. Vinny probably doesn't want to do that because it has all of his personal student information on there. But we can send some support links on how to do that.
Yeah.
And Marcia had a question. So is there a way to embed the app and the game?
That I don't.
In an HTML page. Oh.
There might be. I actually honestly do not know. I've never tried to do that.
When, Vinny, when you hit share on one of the projects and you go to advanced,
show advanced options right at the bottom.
Oops. Yep. And then you go to embed for web or embed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a little bit of HTML you can copy and paste onto whatever your HTML pages are, and you can embed your app or game, which I think is what Marcia was talking about.
That's a great question. I had never known we could do that. So, yay, I learned something.
Yeah, I didn't know that was a possibility either. Very cool.
Yeah.
To answer, Vic had a question about, I do use the dashboard that Code has. It's awesome. Everything is there. But when I just want to see their projects, I'll create a Google form for them where I just want to see their project. And there's nothing public or there's nothing private here that I'm going to show you. But so I can see their students and what their project is, and then click on it. And that way they're all just in one place. Like it's just easier for me to go grade quickly in addition to what the dashboard already provides. So just
there's Michelle asked about if there's a way to tell if a project's been remixed. Not right now. We don't expose that information publicly. Our platform heavily supports remixing and sharing and all of this project stuff, but we also understand that teachers might want to know that, so that's something we're thinking about for the future. And then Marcia asked, oh, I think that was for Vinny. Do you ever share all the links with students so that they can play each other's games?
That's a good question. I guess, what we do is we do so I guess the answer is no, but we do what do they call it, like a Hall of Fame walk, where we'll go around and they have to peer review other people's grades or games, and so they'll go, to 2 or 3 different people's games. But I could easily take that block from the Excel sheet and just share that with them, and then they can go look at everybody. So that's a good suggestion, Marcia thinks, and I think that would be easy to do from that Google form, just to copy that out, paste it into a doc, and then they would all have access to it.
Yeah, something else that we've seen teachers do is have like a computer science fair. And so basically like a science fair, but you're sharing all of your projects. I think students really like seeing each other's games, and I think they actually end up sending each other their games, whether teachers ask them to or not, because you can send to phone, and so they'll send links around. Yeah, totally. People from the community, Marcia said, you could invite them to come and play games and comment. What's really great is we've seen people invite, parents and family, and kind of make it like host an hour of code as well as a science fair. These are all like really great things to kind of involve people in computer science. So, yeah. Okay, I think we got to all the questions. I was going to talk about another new feature that Erin recently made, actually, in Game Lab. So we had talked a bit about the animation tab in Game Lab, so I wanted to explore that a bit more. If you want to open up a project, Vinny, in Game Lab and go to the Animation tab. Oh, and Nicole says she shared links for debugging and peer reviews. Yeah, if you want to go to the fruit smoothie's good. Yeah. This is a game that I made because I made a fruit category or a food category in the animation tab. So I wanted to make something where if you click all of them, if you get all of them, they'll end up small and in the blender and start blending, which is really silly, but I thought it was cute.
I need to work on my gaming skills.
If you go to View Code, you might have to remix this to see the animation tab, but we'll get there. Yeah, so here's my view, and then Vinny's going to make a copy of this game by remixing it. And so now in this copy, we can go to the animation tab and look at all of these animations. So one of the new features that Erin just enabled is being able to export these animations. So let's say that your students make something they love in their animation. Like maybe the pear has a smiley face and it winks at you. And they want to save that outside of code.org. They totally can. The purple tab on the right, very far right, the second one, I believe, if you click on that, you can actually export all of your animations as a GIF or as a zip of individual images.
Do you want to run through an example real fast?
Sure.
Okay. Vinny, if you want to add a new frame to this pear animation right here, it should be, you'll see, oh, you can make a copy. And then, right underneath the, oh, you almost had it. Yeah, add a new frame right underneath the small thumbnail of the pear, kind of towards the left of the screen. Yep. So if we click another food here, we can pick any category. And let's say we wanted to, on the second frame, let's draw a smiley face to show that our pear is very happy to be blended. So you can click the pen and then,
These are beautiful.
Oh, we found another Picasso here. See there, you bring it in the circle. That's a good one. We got it. So we can draw a little mouse. Perfect. And so now you can see on the very left of the screen that the pear _1_ copy _1 is blinking back and forth between the faceless pear and the smiley pear. So if now we want to export that image, we'll now have our very own GIF of our very happy, very smiley pear. And we can, then send that to our mom to show how excited we are about her baked pears for dinner. It really, allows us to have kind of some fun and share even more what we've made in Game Lab. So now we can see, I guess our share settings might not be set to show that off, but it is a really fun way just to show some cool stuff that you've made in Game Lab. You can now export it. You can also import, you can import your own images as well. So if there's a meme your students are really enjoying, they can bring that into their games as well. So,
yeah, I think this highlights how many pictures can be in the GIF.
That's a great question. I don't know if there's an upper limit. I'm sure there's a reasonable upper limit, but theoretically we could add as many frames as we wanted to. We would just follow the same procedure we did to add that second frame, is just click add a new frame and then do that as many times as we'd like. I don't know if we've actually tested if there's an upper limit.
There's definitely an upper limit in our system. I think if you put kind of more than 10-ish, it might get a little bit slow.
Yeah.
That's something that we're working on improving as well.
Absolutely.
Since we're here, I wanted to talk a little bit about the animation tab in Game Lab. I think this is one of the standout reasons to use Game Lab. In addition to the way that they can interact, I think like being able to create all of these animations is really powerful and can be really engaging for students. If you pull up if you like go to hit make a new animation, so you pull up the animation library, yeah, you can go to it from add new frame. Yep.
What do you want?
So in addition to just kind of being able to draw whatever you want, there's also a whole set of like preloaded animations and images in here that can kind of get students to start off with. So, lots of different animals and background things. I'm trying to think of what the people characters are called. Character or kid. If you search for kid in the search bar, characters. Yeah. Oh yeah, there's lots of different aliens. Some of these, if you hover over the images, you can see that they animate. So that means that there are multiple frames. So for example, this alien can actually walk. And later on, if you go to the search bar in here and you type in kid just above where you are, so there's also lots of like characters, like kid characters. And there's also blank versions of those characters. If you go to the final page of this, I believe, if you go to page 3, there's some blank ones. So we've seen really fun things with these blank ones because you can use like the paint bucket tool like you would in, Microsoft Paint to fill this in and kind of make it look like you, which is really fun. I think Vinny had up there a dress-up game that I made, which is a little dress-up character for myself, just to kind of demo it. Like I made a bunch of different animations and like was able to, you can flip through outfits, and all of that is made in the animation tab. And so I think it's a really powerful way to kind of integrate a lot of visual creativity in your computer science projects.
Mm-hmm. Also, these are all outfits that Caley actually owns. I can attest that as someone who sits near her. So it's a lot of fun. It's great to have like some starter images for students who kind of are always say, I'm stuck, I don't know what to do. It's a great way to start, and it's also a great way to kind of really build off of it. So.
Oops. Adobe is your friend.
Any questions about kind of the animation tab or anything in that space? Folders within my projects. So there aren't folders for animations in Game Lab. The question was, is it possible to create folders within my projects? There's not folders for animations in Game Lab, and I don't believe there are with App Lab either. App Lab has kind of a different interface where you're kind of more focused on the layout, and you can upload images, but you're not creating them yourself within the screen. And then, so I don't think that there's folders right now.
There's not folders right now.
I love this game. What fun. Can you imagine in August?
Marcia, we really love your idea.
Project of draw and dress your idea.
Yeah, we love that. I'm trying to get a tiara into our animation library, and I would make a princess scientist. I think it's a great project to get students familiar into what it means to add in new animations and combine them and just kind of get comfortable and have a lot of fun, learning the basics of code is awesome.
Yeah, and the animation library, in addition to all of our tools, are things that are always things that we're working on and building and improving all the time. We get bug reports or emails or tickets pretty much daily with suggestions of things we can build and ways we can make it better, which is always great. We love those. And we take those to heart. One of the, I'm trying to think of, so many features are because people wrote in Game Lab, you actually have to plot where your sprite is going to go on a coordinate system, so an XY coordinate system, which can be really hard. That's a lot of math for students sometimes. And so we got that feedback, some teachers wrote in, and now there's this feature called Show Grid, which is just a checkbox below that workspace. that lets you see kind of the coordinate system, what the numbers are, so that it helps kids map out where those things are. And we've also added animations to the library because of suggestions. That library has, I mean, tripled in size. And, you know, you can always upload your own images, but it is really nice to kind of, you know, have a good starting point there.
Yeah, we're always trying to iterate and make things better.
Awesome.
Organize projects into folders. Yeah, that's a really great suggestion. I think that that project list, Vic, on the My Projects page can get super long, super fast, especially if you're in this kind of world all the time. And so, yeah, that's something we're thinking about. We're actually kind of reworking that page right now, actually. So there'll be a newer version, and folders is definitely something we should take back to the team and chat about.
Oh, Joe, okay. Joe asked a great question about how to incorporate sprites or objects into AppLab. So as I mentioned, AppLab is, if you come from Game Lab where you can draw and have a lot of power over your animations and your sprites, AppLab can seem kind of limited in that way, just because you don't have quite as much control. But one thing we do allow is we allow you to still upload images, you can add pictures, and you get a bit more, we'd call it like drag and drop control over it. So when you're designing a screen, you can upload a picture and then drag your picture right to where you want it to be and say, that's where I want this picture. So it's not quite the same as Game Lab because we don't have that draw loop going in the background, so it's a bit more static. But you can still upload assets and keep those around. You can upload sounds and have those available as well.
Yeah, sounds is really fun. Students really like this. There's also a sound library in both AppLab and Game Lab, actually. Maybe we should go to AppLab and just take a look at design mode and kind of pull up what it looks like since we kind of made an animation, we might as well make a screen in AppLab and see what that looks like.
You on a blank project?
Yeah, sure. Perfect. Marcia suggested you can keep the downloaded, kind of that downloaded animations from Game Lab and re-upload them to AppLab, I believe, which, yeah, is totally possible.
Mm-hmm.
But in AppLab, you don't have the same concept of a sprite. You can add images, but it's not, it doesn't have like the same physics and interactability that Game Lab does.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're in a brand new AppLab project, and this is what it looks like, blank screen, no code. And if we want to go to design mode, which is that second tab, all of these are elements that we can put on the screen. And so this is really, really great for prototyping if you want to do something quickly. So Vinny was going to pull out a button or a picture.
Pull out an image, yeah.
Yeah, all of those are great. So you literally just pull them out onto the screen as you would want them. And so, yeah, make that picture bigger. Maybe we'll like upload the pear or something. I don't know, that we just
That's
made.
an ugly looking pear. Yeah. Maybe we should do the sun. It's prettier.
Maybe we'll do, yeah. The pear's happy, and that's nice.
We can choose that. Cool. So now we have this this sun, and then we can change the text of our button.
Did I lose you guys?
No,
I wish it was that easy to click for sun.
Thanks for joining us, Marcia.
Yeah, and so this is a kind of a great example of the different ways you interact with Game Lab and AppLab. So in AppLab, we're kind of picking things up, we're dragging and dropping them to organize them. We can have buttons. So it is pretty different from the animation style of Game Lab, but I think it still gives us a really good opportunity to use sprites or images that we want to have in our app.
Joe had a question. So given that we said both of these tools use JavaScript in the back end, how are there different limitations to both? So that's a great question. So in the code tab mode, yes, in our toolbox, each of our tools, each of our kind of app workspaces has this toolbox. And the toolbox is where you can kind of see what functions and what's the word I'm looking for? Objects, I guess, are available to you in code. And so some of these are actually available in both App Lab and Game Lab. So for example, variable like var x equals 10. That is part of JavaScript. So that is available in both App Lab and Game Lab. Anything that's in JavaScript is available in both. Now, each of these tools are kind of designed for specific purposes, right? Like one is for prototyping apps, another one is more kind of interactive animations and games. And so they each have different additional functions that you can call kind of on top of what is already available in JavaScript. And he's making something. When you click on event, click button, x equals x plus 1.
You don't have to follow me. You can just keep
okay. But jumping off of what Caley was saying about the different capabilities that are built in on top of JavaScript, a great example in App Lab is the ability to move between screens. So here we've designed a single screen, but if we wanted to, we could add more screens and design different pages or screens to our app. And we've added these controls that allow you to kind of move between them. And so a lot of what we've done there is to kind of facilitate that process to make it a little easier for students to be able to start doing that in their apps. But that doesn't exist in Game Lab because we don't have the concept of what a screen is. So I guess that's one example of how we've scaffolded these ideas on top of vanilla JavaScript that really help us move towards one teaching goal and one learning goal versus another.
Right. So in that toolbox, for example, we saw a Mother's Day app where there was a bunch of kind of squiggles and drawing, and that was kind of turtle functions, and turtle is specific to App Lab. It's not just available in regular JavaScript, so it's not available in Game Lab either. But Game Lab has things like world.seconds, and world.seconds returns the number of seconds that have passed since the beginning of hitting run. That is also not available in regular JavaScript. That's specific to Game Lab. And then there was another question, is it possible to add a P5.js library in either platform? So P5.js, P5 Play actually is a library that kind of is what we base our Game Lab functions off of. So it's very similar to P5 Play, and it allows us to do all of these like really cool, collisions and interactions between sprites. Because of how scaffolded and specific these tools are, we aren't able to import any libraries into Game Lab or App Lab. But those are great projects to be able to do outside of the code.org platform. Your students are getting more advanced. Cool.
Yeah, these are good questions.
Any other questions?
Got about 2 minutes left. And yeah, awesome. I definitely want to answer as many questions as you have, but also respect your time as well. So, yeah.
Thanks, Tom. Great question.
That's a good question, too.
There's a limit on how much data can be stored in App Lab.
Probably. We've yet to run into that ourselves or have someone tell us they've run into that. So there's probably a limit, but I think we've seen it used in a lot of different cases, and no one's yet reported to us that they have run into a limit, and if they have, what it is.
Yeah, the data tab specifically.
Yeah. But if you find out, definitely let us know. We'd like to know.
Yeah, try to break it, Vic.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, people, whenever we go into classrooms for testing, students love to break the tools. It's part of programming, right? Part of programming is seeing what your limitations are, what you can and what you can't do. And students love to break stuff all the time. And they're always like, we broke it. And we're like, well, you found something new. So, yeah, it's fun to see.
breaking things is part of computer science, and learning how to fix them is the second part of computer science. So that's awesome to see in here.
Very cool.
If they wanted to create a program that utilizes those GameLab and AppLab capabilities, what platform could they use? Right now, that's not possible. The platforms aren't, these functionalities aren't available outside of GameLab or AppLab. But that is an interesting use case that we're thinking about. Yep, and the webinars will be posted. Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah, and real quick, I think they would want me to say this, and if these ladies want to hang out around and answer more questions, that's great too. But anyway, the deadlines, if you are interested in becoming a community ambassador for csforallteachers.org, there's information on their website there for that. And if you're not already a part of that community, I would definitely suggest joining or signing up. There's a lot of good, useful information there. And then there's another webinar coming up there on June 4th, as you can see, on opportunities concerning CSP. Okay, so and then there's also a survey in the chat that Michelle would like you to complete, if you don't mind, after this. Okay, so back to like any other good questions or information need to be shared besides those things. Good teachers call this week.
Definitely check out the gallery. Definitely publish your apps that you like that your students have made to the gallery so that we can see them too. We love seeing what everyone makes. And if you have more questions or more suggestions, definitely send those into code.org. We love hearing your feedback. We make changes to our applications all the time, and that all comes from our teachers and our students. So yeah, please do that. Totally. Oh, WebLab.
Oh, yeah, we have one last question on WebLab. WebLab, for those of you guys who aren't familiar, is another tool in kind of our lab family, and it allows you to build websites, kind of pretty small pared down websites, but still pretty powerful websites, and kind of learn the basics of HTML and CSS. It fits in pretty differently because it is a whole kind of different style of development that really focuses on CSS and HTML, but so we often don't necessarily include it with our AppLab versus GameLab discussion, but it is a great kind of sister program that if you're interested more in learning web development, it's a great place to get started for that as well.
Yeah, and it's still part of our ecosystem, so same thing, you can still see it. WebLab projects in your list of projects. There's still WebLab projects in the public gallery, and you can still see those WebLab projects kind of in your teacher dashboard and your kind of student list of projects. So it's all integrated. WebLab is paired with CS Discovery's Unit 2. That's the WebLab unit, and so it has kind of step-by-step of how to use, both how to use the tool, but mostly like what is web development, how do you program in there. Yep. Cool.
All right. Like they said, do contact code.org because they do answer, they take feedback all the time and make changes based on the feedback. That's one great thing I love about how they do things there, is they're listening and they want to make it better and they'll find a way. So thank you so much, ladies, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah. Have a great evening, y'all.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you all for joining us. The recording will be posted on the CS for All Teachers website. You can see our email and website and our Twitter profile on the screen now. Please follow us, and if you're not already a member of CS for All Teachers, sign up for a free membership on our website. Thank you all for joining tonight. Have a good evening.